Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this video today we're checking out a video titled 7 Myths British People Believe About America. So I'm kind of interested to see the myths, and if you guys want to subscribe to this channel, I'm doing a lot more reactions to the United States and kind of learning about the culture and the history. So if you guys want more videos like that, drop a like on the video and let's get right into it for today, my friend. Let's go.
Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. I'm Lawrence Brown and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to myths. Specifically, myths
Everyone
that
loves a
British
good myth.
people, including myself at one point, believed about the United States of America. But it is amazing what 14 years of living in the United States will do to your understanding and your perceptions about this very country. For instance, I learned early on that they don't have Cornish pasties, and I learned slightly less earlier on, so...
Wait, really? They don't? There must be somewhere that has Cornish pasties in America because they are too nice. What?
Later, that Michigan has them. But I don't live in
okay.
Michigan, so one way or another I still have to have them imported. A quick reminder that if you're not subscribed to this channel, you can change that fact about your life right now. But these myths go way beyond the absence of quintessentially British food. And so now that I've lived here for about a seventh of a century, it's time to outline some of the myths that us British believe about America and Americans. This is a funny one because I think television...
Okay, that's obviously not true. I mean, some people live in apartments in America, but I do feel like a lot of people, especially in probably outside of Los Angeles, outside of New York, do probably live in a big house. And obviously not everybody, but I do imagine on average they probably do outside of those locations.
Television gives us this notion that Americans do all live in giant houses like the McAllisters do in Home Alone, but it's not entirely the case. Sure, I mean, statistically, American houses are on average larger than their UK counterparts. There are a number of reasons for this, which I outlined in this video. But to say that all Americans live in really large houses is a complete fabrication of anything resembling the truth. And I was a good example of this before I became a YouTube sensation, because when I first moved to Chicago, we had to do things on a budget. Between me and my wife, we weren't making a great income, and this is a major city, so we had to sort of settle for an apartment whose dimensions were 300 square feet. And for those of you who don't know, that's about the size of a shoebox, roughly. We had to leave our shoes outside the door. That's how small it was. And it is worth reiterating, I think, that the cost of living in the United States does fluctuate massively across the country.
Yeah.
When I lived in Indiana, just one state over, we were paying about $530 a month. That's basically unheard of in Chicago.
Wow, that is a really good price. Yeah, like I said, in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, the rent prices are like extreme.
And it's certainly unheard of in New York City, which of course was the city in which the show Friends is set. And I think it's shows like that that gave us this impression that Americans were all living in big apartments. And speaking of houses, I was alerted to a tweet recently from a British person who couldn't believe that American addresses go way up into the thousands, and their belief on this was that every street in the United States has thousands of houses on it. And this was a belief that I used to have, because the country is absolutely massive, so you almost expect it to have to house that many people. But
that's a good point, I guess.
There are way fewer people in this country per square mile than there are in Britain, so it doesn't add up. And that's when I got looking into it, and in a previous video I outlined it doesn't really work like that. On any given street, they don't start at the number 1 and then end at 10,000. Often, and it's the case here in Chicago, you'll usually have a string of houses, for example, all in the 6,000s on a given street, and that's because it's about 6 miles from the center of downtown.
Wow, that is like a lot of houses in like such a small condensed area though.
Mile in from that, they're all 5,000s. Another mile, they're all 4,000s, etc., etc. Now, not every city in the US does it from the center of the city. It could be from another part of the city or just some other central point. But that's sort of a general rule for how the numbering works on US houses. This one comes up again and again.
See, that one's just ignorant. I mean, every country has history, and America definitely has some rich history, and I recently reacted to the Star Spangled Banner, the history behind that, and that was extremely interesting. But say the US doesn't have history, That's like a very ignorant statement.
The United States is such a young country that it basically doesn't have a history. And I've always thought of this perception of America to be quite a lazy one. Because even if you go back to 1776 through to the present day, yes, it is a short amount of time in comparison to the history of Britain, but think about all of the insane things that happened in that period. And even if you ignore all that, there's one thing that we tend to forget because we don't get taught it very deeply in Britain, and that is the thousands of years of native history that happened before we
That is a
even
good point
turned
too.
up. I was absolutely blown away, not literally, that would be weird, when I went to Cahokia Mounds here in Illinois. Many hundreds of years ago, Cahokia Mounds used to be a native city, and it had about 20,000 people, which might not sound like a lot by both American and British standards, but back in the day, that was more than London. And I once read about this volcano eruption that happened in present-day Oregon a few thousand years ago. And this eruption was witnessed and recorded by Native Americans who were in the area at the time. And long story short, they basically saw the origins of Crater Lake, which is absolutely huge. To be honest, both Brits and Americans love their myths. I mean, we've got the Loch Ness Monster, you've got a cryogenically frozen Walt Disney, and this new mystery.
I mean, yeah, that is a myth everyone's heard of, that Walt Disney's body is frozen and one day they're going to like unfreeze it when they have like a cure and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure everyone's heard that myth.
On BritBox, Sherwood has got...
modern day Robin Hood.
Can we not do that?
Oh.
Start giving nicknames to wanted murderers and the press gets excited.
And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, why are you watching a gripping television show with your cat? Aren't you supposed to be editing this video? And the answer is yes. But you know what it's like. You sit down to watch just one episode of a really riveting show inspired by real-life murders and you end up binge-watching the entire thing. Trust me, I did the same thing with other shows like Line of Duty, The Responder, Why Didn't They Ask Evans? All of which, of course, are available on BritBox.
Show me your salute for the sheriff. Thought that was a salute.
No, that's American. British, American, British, American.
You can start streaming titles like these today via your smartphone, tablet, desktop, Chromecast, Apple TV or Roku device, as well as LG and Samsung smart TVs. Head to BritBox.com/LostInThePond and use the promo code LostInThePond when signing up for a monthly subscription, and you'll get 50% of your first month.
Yeah, guys,
the link
go
is
sign
also
up,
in my
use this guy's
description
codes to support the
below.
creator, of course.
This one is embarrassing for me because years ago I believed that
I'm not going to lie, that in my opinion, as an outsider, there does seem to be a lot of similarities between the US and Canada, but obviously they're very different at the same time. But there's definitely a lot of similarities, in my opinion, as an outsider.
Canada and the United States were basically the same country. And the reason that I believe that is, number one, I was 12, so cut me some slack. And number two,
I think
my
every
only
kid
sort of
thought that, though.
exposure to both countries was through the people, was through the way they spoke. And to my young ears, which couldn't yet differentiate these two accents, Macho Man Randy Savage and Bret Hart basically had the same accent, just with an entirely different timbre. And that's all I had to go on. And I think it's what a lot of British people have to go on, because I still occasionally see those comments. Oh, what is the difference between Canada and America? Or is it essentially that one has Mounties and the other doesn't? And it's only since I moved here that I've become super aware of the substantial difference between the two countries. Completely different healthcare systems, completely different food, completely different use of English. Right, in Britain we call it the loo, in America they call it a restroom, in Canada they call it a washroom. And I've seen all manner of different examples of that kind of thing. In America they don't celebrate Boxing Day, in Canada they do. The Canadian dollar...
Oh, I actually didn't know that. I know that Americans don't celebrate Boxing Day. I found that out like not too long ago. But I didn't know Canada does celebrate Boxing Day. That's like the day after Christmas, where obviously I think it's like you're getting rid of all the boxes. That's why it's called that. But there's always Boxing Day sales as well.
Is different to the American dollar. In some ways they go with British English in places that America doesn't. And now that I'm older and I've listened to some of the regionalisms throughout the United States, even the way Americans speak is different to how Canadians speak. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these differences certainly go way beyond how the two countries pronounce the word about. I've touched on this before, but I couldn't really do a video without including it in this list. This perception that Americans are loud and boisterous.
I do think this is like an extremely common stereotype that a lot of people do believe, but obviously that does not apply to all Americans. You get like quiet Americans, you get people who are reserved, but I do feel like this is the common stereotype people do believe.
And I can understand on some level where that comes from, because I think the way Americans speak, it comes from a different part of the throat. So it's a bit more projected, right?
That was a
us
good
Brits,
accent.
It's more sort of, I don't know, understated a lot of the time. I think another reason that we think Americans are loud is how they present themselves in films. There might even have been a time in my life where I thought all Americans were loud just because Jim Carrey was. He's Canadian, isn't he? He is Canadian. And culturally speaking, I definitely have found that Americans speak at a higher volume when they're in restaurants together. But there are so many other examples of the opposite being true. On match day, after we've had a pint or 6, you know, we're singing the songs of our team who we love because they happen to be situated in the town that we were born in. And it's just what we do when we leave a nightclub, which, you know, I haven't done in 20 years. But when we did, you know, I'd be on the street yelling at traffic cones, because that might have just been me. But what I'm saying is, when we get drunk, we very much give Americans a run for their money. There's a loud person in all of us, right? And once we free ourselves of our inhibitions, we can let out all of the decibels we want. That's not a call to action. It's merely an observation.
What?
This is only funny, not because...
What? I've never heard this myth. Like, Americans all wear fanny packs. Nah, I've never heard this one.
Because of the image of Americans walking around with bomb bags on, but it's because we call them bomb bags and you call them fanny packs, and it's bloody hilarious. It is also partly the visual, because bomb bags have never been cool, but this notion
That feels
which
like an
I
80s
occasionally
thing.
read, that Americans are just always walking around wearing one, is very laughable, especially as somebody who's lived here 14 years. So it's quite dumbfounding, this one. I'm not saying that all British people think this way, but the ones that do, I'd be very interested to hear, do they think that way because they met an American in 1994 and they've just held on to that belief? Or are American tourists still wearing bomb bags? Do people carry cash? But I don't. I can tell you this, I don't have a bomb bag / fanny pack radar.
To be fair, it's a cool way to keep your items,
surveilling
though.
the populace to see
Kinda
whether
smart.
they do or do not have a fanny pack. But my feeling is, I don't remember seeing one in a while. So I think this is one very time-specific stereotype that can now be laid to rest. All right?
Americans
And yes,
don't
I
say
thought I'd
autumn.
include one that was quite topical, not just because we are in the autumn, but also because I mentioned this fact on my YouTube short yesterday.
Yeah, they say fall, right? Am I wrong? We're gonna find out, but I'm pretty sure Americans say fall instead of autumn.
Now, while for reasons that were laid out in that YouTube short, Americans prefer the term fall, I was
Yeah.
surprised to find that the word autumn was pretty common among Americans.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if this is a recent
I believe
thing,
that
like the
myth,
whole
actually.
country just
I
woke
thought
up
they
one
didn't say
morning and
autumn.
watched Lost in the Pond and thought to themselves, yes, we're changing things now. Or if it's just sort of always been here as an alternative to fall. And you might be thinking, ooh, Lawrence, aren't there many surprising word alternatives that Americans use that Brits don't know about? And the answer to that is yes. I merely brought this one up so I could make that very point. This is undoubtedly a pandemic era thing, but I've seen an increasing number of Americans using the word jab to mean shot. I once worked with an American colleague who liked to use the word bonkers. So in part because of the
Bonkers.
internet, just as Britain is taking on quite a few Americanisms, I think the same is true in reverse, and it will be very interesting to look further into those details. And those are just a handful of myths that some Brits believe about America and Americans. Let me know in the comments some of the myths that you've had to dispel about this country. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS. And please subscribe to this channel and ensure to click my bell. And if you like what you see, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LostInThePond. Until the next video, goodbye.
Go subscribe to this guy's channel if you happen to enjoy this video, because I definitely did. But I have to say, most of the myths about everyone in a big house, I do think houses are bigger in America. That's definitely like something I think is true, and they're a lot more condensed spaces of houses. Because as a kid, I always wanted to live on like one of those streets where everyone kind of plays out. That was my dream, man, as a kid. You have the white picket fence, the green grass. That was definitely my dream as a kid, man. That seemed like so much fun. And Americans being loud, I definitely think is a stereotype. Obviously, not all Americans are loud. But one that did really get me, that I actually believed, is Americans don't say autumn. I thought they all said fall. So that one is one I actually believed and got debunked. So if you guys want more reaction videos like this, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great day, everyone.